Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started in just a moment. I just want to wait another minute or two for any latecomers to join the Zoom call. And for those of you who may be watching on the NASW New Jersey Facebook page, welcome, Facebook friends. If you are watching on Facebook Live and have questions for the presenters, you can put them in the Facebook comments, and we'll translate those over to the Zoom meeting to try and get your question answered. For those of you who are here with us on Zoom, we'll have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. But in the interim, if questions come up, you're welcome to put them in the chat so that we can get to them when we get to the Q&A period. And you'll also have an opportunity during Q&A to raise your hand and speak directly to the presenters if you so like. So it looks like everyone who is here now is connected. So why don't we get underway? Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Jeff Feld. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Communications here at NASW New Jersey, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's community conversation, Teen Dating Violence, What Social Workers Need to Know. We have with us today a couple of representatives from the organization One Love, Bridget Boylan and Adrian Grant, who are engagement managers at One Love. And I'd also like to say hello to Ellen Blaze, who's the CEO at, or executive director, executive director at One Love, who's also with us today. So thank you all for being here so much. And before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping notes. So please remember that we are recording this conversation for future use. So we do ask that you remain on mute throughout the presentation unless we ask you to unmute so that we can eliminate any background noise. And if you do come on to speak in person, just remember to avoid using any inappropriate language or sharing any client information or client names or anything like that, since this is going to be a public video. With that said, I'm really happy to turn things over to our presenters. So Bridget, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Jeff. And 1 second, I'm just going to share my screen really quick. Okay, so 1 second. Okay, so thank you so much, Jeff and NJSW, for inviting us to speak during this lunch and learn today. My name is Bridget Boylan. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an engagement manager for the tri-state region, and I oversee New Jersey, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Adrian.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adrian Grant, and I use the pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm also an engagement manager for New York State, with the exception of New York City, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you today.
So really quickly, our goal for today's session is to really provide a framework on how trusted adults, such as educators, parents, other community members, can use One Love's tools to educate young people and foster intentional spaces where behavioral change is possible. Our hope is that anyone here today will walk away with knowledge also on how to bring One Love to their community. So before we jump into our conversation today, Adrian is just going to quickly set the tone for us.
So here is just our self-care reminder to all of you. I'm sure within the scope of work that you do, you encourage people all the time to do that. And here is our opportunity to do the same for you. Today, we will be exploring topics about relationship health and encouraging people to care for themselves throughout this presentation. And so if you need to step away for a glass of water or anything along those lines, please feel free to do so. It would be a disservice to all of you and to us if we did not acknowledge your self-care and the significance of it throughout the course of this conversation today. And now I'll pass it back over to Bridget, and she'll be walking us through our learning journey for today's session.
Thanks, Adrian. So what we're going to do today is we're going to explore a few key areas to provide more insight into why we do this work, how we do it, and what we have to offer trusted adults who are seeking to lead these conversations in their communities. So we're going to dive into our why, which is the driving force behind our work, and a little overview of our organization.
All right, so who is One Love and what do we do? We believe here that everyone will be in relationships, including friendships, romantic dynamics, and more. And we really focus on creating tools for young people from a prevention standpoint to empower them with the skills needed to have healthy relationships and how to identify unhealthy relationship behaviors. And now we'll be reviewing the driving forces behind our work. So we have these statistics that we share every time we do a workshop and every time we do a training. We have 1 in 2 transgender and non-binary people, over 1 in 3 women, and 1 in 3 men experience relationship abuse during their lifetime. And throughout this presentation, when we mention domestic violence, we want to be clear that we are talking about both emotional and physical abuse. And so we have to be realistic about the scope of how intimate partner violence, or IPV, affects the global majority, and we must narrow our focus to be inclusive of populations that are disproportionately impacted by relationship abuse. And so now Bridget will dig into a few more stats now.
Thanks, Adrienne. So to highlight the sheer magnitude of this issue, specifically as it pertains to marginalized identities, I'm going to walk us through a few more statistics. So as we mentioned, 54% of trans or non-binary people, 46% of American Indian, Native Alaskan women, 43% of Black women, and 53% of multiracial women will have experienced some form of intimate partner violence in their lifetime, in comparison to 34.6% of their white peers. So from a prevention standpoint, these statistics really help to inform our educational approach, specifically from an intersectional and anti-oppressive lens. Our research shows that youth who have survived dating violence are more likely to experience long-term health consequences such as depression, anxiety, thoughts of suicide, and may also engage in unhealthy coping behaviors such as using tobacco, alcohol, and drugs. And really, everything that we do at One Love is to disrupt these statistics. We want to acknowledge that these statistics paint a picture about who is at risk, but we want to provide space for the many survivor stories that haven't been captured statistically due to a number of factors, which we're going to walk through now.
So data on IPV is often underreported across all communities, but there are specific groups that are susceptible to a wider range of underreporting due to structural, cultural, and additional factors. These factors potentially impact our ability to truly understand how IPV truly affects people who hold specific identities. And some of these communities include LGBTQ individuals, communities of color, individuals with disabilities, immigrant and refugee communities, and people who identify as men. The reasonings behind these factors are nuanced and varied, including cultural beliefs in communities, social stigmas, historical trauma, and many others beyond the ones named on this slide. It's important for healthcare providers, community organizations, and law enforcement to be aware of the potential for underreporting and to work to create safe and accessible spaces for individuals to report intimate partner violence and access support. I do want to emphasize that these are powerful forces preventing people from talking about the topic. And while we cannot solve this, these are important considerations to see why this topic is taboo and trying to lower those barriers for survivors to report on IPV. And so now we've carved out our why, and let's take a few moments to jump into our program model to show how we are working to actively disrupt these statistics.
One second. Okay, thank you, Adrienne. Sorry. Okay. So at One Love, we use film-based workshops that normalize engaging in conversations about relationships, and we work really hard to make sure that this content is accessible, relatable, and approachable for young people. So our program is evidence-based and aligns to the National Health and CASEL, which stands for Collaborative Advancing Social and Emotional Learnings standards. So our curriculum can be used with students as young as 4th grade to college age, and they are adaptable to different environments such as small group conversations, a wide variety of nonprofit settings, one-to-one sessions, or integrated into more formal settings such as school advisory groups, SEL spaces, or health classes. So you might be wondering, what does this actually look like? So we come into a space, we show a film, and then we lead a conversation about the behaviors that we see in these films. And now Adrian's gonna talk a little bit more about how these conversations are structured.
Thank you, Bridget. So to introduce the first part of our program structure, we use these 10 signs of healthy and unhealthy relationship behaviors to give young people a language to talk about relationships. All of our educational materials are anchored in these 10 signs. As Bridget had mentioned earlier, once we show our film, we start a conversation using these words to describe what's happening in the film. Our goal is for every young person to understand these 10 signs in a language that is authentic to them. These behaviors can show up in any type of relationship, the one we have with ourselves, which impacts our relationship that we have with others, our relationship with others, and even the dynamics we experience within systems and structures. Now, Bridget, I have a quick question for you. How do you see young people responding to these 10 signs?
Great question, Adrian. So what I typically see with students is that they're used to repeating things that they see online or TikTok to describe unhealthy relationships, words like toxic, narcissistic, gaslighting, and just want to acknowledge these words mean a lot of different things to different people. So what's really great about the 10 signs is it helps us to develop a common language that describe these behaviors that are well known within the IPV and DV space. For example, possessiveness. If we're teaching a middle schooler about possessiveness, they're likely going to have a different understanding of what that means, since they probably haven't been in a very serious romantic relationship yet. But they probably have an understanding of what that might look like in a friendship dynamic. So what we try to do in our films is we show examples of how that can show up to them in a way that they understand and can make meaning out of. So yeah.
And certainly relate to that in more ways than one. I can certainly say that I'm sure both of us have experienced that in our time here hosting a few workshops, and hopefully all of you will be able to hear that yourselves too. I want to be able to say that all One Love education is rooted in our 10 signs of a healthy and unhealthy relationship, and we use this common language to teach young people to describe what it looks, sounds, and feels like to be in a healthy and unhealthy relationship, and how to describe the behaviors they may see in their relationships and those around them.
So at this point, what have we done? So we've shown a film that depicts unhealthy and healthy relationship behaviors. We define this common language to describe those behaviors, and we've engaged the students in a conversation to normalize and allow them to practice that sort of dialogue. And why have we done that? Because our goal and belief is that young people really need to build skills around these 7 learning objectives that we've defined. And for example, young people may have to be able to engage in conversations about healthy and unhealthy relationships in order to help a friend, communicate boundaries and consent, and navigate endings, but most importantly, access resources when they're in need. And it's not just us that has defined these key 7 learning objectives. These are the known protective factors in the field of DV to help young people avoid relationship abuse. So what our program model is really trying to do is to just create spaces where we can practice these things and build skills around these 7 learning objectives.
Thank you, Bridget. And so we've covered those learning objectives. We've covered those 10 signs. Now we're going to dig into the how, right? So One Love was founded based on the belief that young people can change the statistics around relationship abuse for the next generation. And when they want to help each other, if they know how to, they will. And we're going to provide insight on how One Love's tools help students build skill in our learning objectives by showing an example piece of our video content. So we recently created a PSA as a tool to unpack what digital abuse can look like. And first, we'll explore some data about what our teens are experiencing, which informs the work that we do at One Love, and specifically this most recent digital abuse campaign.
Almost 1 in 3 teen daters reported their partner checked up with them multiple times per day on the internet or on their cell phone, asking where they are, who they're with, or what they're doing. More than 1 in 4 teen daters admit to having used social media to track their partner's whereabouts. 15% of teens with dating experiences reported that a partner used the internet or text messages to try to pressure them into sexual activity that they did not want to have. So before we show our most recent piece of content, due to this data that I just read, we created this 4-part series, which has generated the most engagement that we've had to date with over 40 million views, vast majority of whom are under the age of 18 within our target demographic. So before I show this is just one example of the many films that we have available, and we'd like to acknowledge that this is simply one portrayal of what a relationship can look like, and our young people's experiences might be way more nuanced than this, depending on the various identities that they hold and bring into a space. So these films, they're used as a case study, a conversation starter, and a catalyst to a more complex and layered discussion, which Adrienne and I will model after we watch this.
Why can't I be here? I'm with my friends.
You're not your friends.
How did you even know I was here?
Your location, obviously.
I'm just having fun.
No, you are just desperate for attention. Relief.
Even when they happen on your phone, unhealthy behaviors can still hurt. Learn the signs before things go too far. Visit joinonelove.org.
Everybody could hear that? It was okay, cool.
Thank you, Bridget. And so we have these PSAs that we've been fortunate enough to share, but that's just some of the films. So each of our films come with a facilitator guide that shows adults how to use the film as part of a 3-pronged approach to create behavioral change. And the facilitator guide is structured by 7 key learning objectives that Bridget had covered earlier. And though they highlight the following 3 pathways to introduce the content to your students. And so 1, we have discussion questions, and they foster conversation through dialogue, verbal or nonverbal. We have practice activities, which empower young people to engage in skills-based learning. And then we have reflection prompts. They provide space to build skill through independent or group reflection. And now we're going to model how some of these engagement strategies work in action by using the PSA that we had just watched as a case study. So the first question I might use to start a dialogue with a young person or this a workshop setting with a group of people is to describe how Kayla is feeling. So Bridget, what are some common responses to this question?
Great question, Adrienne. So young people tend to highlight Kayla's loneliness, which I think is a very powerful insight for a young person to be able to distinguish Kayla's potential loneliness and how it's tied to how her partner is making her feel on her phone, even though she's physically surrounded in a room of other people. Young people also might highlight that Kayla is feeling trapped due to the digital abuse that she's experiencing.
Thank you, Bridget. I'm certain that, once again, this is something that may resonate and land with so many people that we currently are experiencing, and the same thing with our fellow participants today.
Thanks. So the next step after we ask this initial open-ended icebreaker question is for students to think about what they're seeing and how it relates to the 10 signs of a healthy and unhealthy relationship. The purpose of this prompt is to deepen young people's understanding of how the vocabulary is showing up and make meaningful connections. So let's take a second to just zoom out and summarize what we just did. So we watched a film and then had a conversation about how unhealthy behaviors can make someone feel. This is just another example of how a discussion question that we'll use to get young people thinking about how their feelings really connect to their behaviors. So, for example, Adrienne, let me ask you, which unhealthy behaviors did you notice in Kayla's relationship?
I would certainly say possessiveness would probably be the number one unhealthy behavior that I witnessed throughout the course of the clip.
Okay, cool. So possessiveness. So where do we feel, where's the possessiveness stemming from as it pertains to Kayla's partner's feelings?
So the unique thing is we don't know for sure based off of, we don't have that full insight, but what we can say is that there's a good chance that it could be insecurity. It could be past hurt and betrayal in previous experiences that the partner has had in other relationships. It could be a certain level of jealousy and frustration there too. So there's a few options out there for this partner.
Absolutely, Adrienne. And I love how you provided like multiple, like we don't know for sure, right? But it's important for us to acknowledge that all of these emotions are perfectly reasonable. And the problem really lies in how Kayla's partner is choosing to respond. So we might feel insecure, but if we're responding with anger, that's an unhealthy response. How can we prioritize healthy conflict and communication over an unhealthy response like that? So we might also use this prompt for a practice activity where we have students find examples within pop culture that glamorize unhealthy behaviors. A reflection prompt might look like having students think about the last time that they felt angry and how they might respond in the future. So we're learning that young people are really eager to have these conversations in our workshops, but also online. And we wanted to share with you all some of the responses on Instagram, these unfiltered comments to what young people were saying about it.
So as Bridget had touched on, shown on this slide are some of the unedited responses from our Instagram when we posted this PSA. And this is for ages 18 and under. We've chosen examples to show the range of thinking that our young people are currently navigating. And so I'm just going to read two quickly. We have here in our second column, the first one, if she respected you and the relationship, she wouldn't be doing that in the first place. And then we also have the third one in our second column. It's simple. I'm not letting my woman go to a party by herself, and I ain't going to a party alone. So we have here different varying responses. Nonetheless, at One Love, we're trying to unpack this way of thinking with young people. This convo is already happening. We want to disrupt it and talk about what is healthy and what's unhealthy. And this shows how ingrained these feelings are. We want to challenge these assumptions and encourage students to unpack the unhealthy behaviors. We want to be able to channel this conversation into something that's more disruptive and positive at the same time. Now, these reactions to our content show that our model is truly provoking conversation that's not usually available elsewhere. And watching this happen in the classroom and outside of the classroom through these unfiltered comment provides even more grounding to our core values in relationship health education for all young people.
Thanks, Adrienne. So once we have shown this, here's some of the takeaways that we hope that young people will leave that conversation with. These conclusions fit seamlessly into the many learning objectives that we shared earlier, such as navigating endings, practicing boundaries and consent, and engaging in conversations about healthy and unhealthy relationships. So we've talked a lot about One Love's approach to starting these conversations, and Adrienne's going to kick us off with our next session where we're going to outline some tips for creating safe and inclusive spaces within those conversations.
Thank you, Bridget. So here at One Love, we have a term, trusted adult. Now, of course, I'm sure within your line of work, you've heard this as well, but we just want to give some framing as to how we view trusted adult and how we pitch it within the context of our work. And so a trusted adult is typically a person who a young person feels comfortable confiding in and seeking guidance from. Trusted adults can be parents, they can be guardians, family members, teachers, coaches, mentors, they can be counselors or other professionals who have a close relationship with that young person. These individuals are seen as reliable, supportive, and able to provide guidance and and advice on important topics such as relationships, mental health, and personal safety. The relationship between a young person and their trusted adult is built on trust, respect, and open communication. So we are using this term, trusted adult, to be inclusive and of all different types of relationships between adults and the young people that we serve, and diverse familial structures, and also to uplift the importance of what it means and looks like to build a foundation of trust with young people.
Okay, so how do we create a safe space? So at One Love, we spend a lot of time about how to intentionally carve out safe and inclusive spaces for young people. In a formal training, we'll spend a lot of time on this, but we just wanted to highlight some of our key practices. So creating a brave and non-judgmental space, it's really important to cultivate an environment where young people feel safe to share their thoughts and feelings without the fear of being judged. So really making sure that we are modeling what we want, the behavior that we want to see in them. Encouraging autonomy. We want to make sure that young people are encouraged to make their own decisions regarding their relationships. We can offer guidance and support, but really try to avoid making decisions for them. We want to help young people develop skills around instinct, something that comes easy for us as adults, but young people are still developing and may not know how to do so yet, depending on, their experiences and how their brain works, if they're neurodivergent rather than neurotypical, and also considering intersectionality of all of the different identities that they hold or are developing as young people.
So we've covered quite a bit today with all of you. And now we have a really critical part of this conversation, which is how can you bring this to your community? How can you bring One Love, our materials and our resources to your community? And Bridget will be digging into two major ways in which anyone can be trained in these resources and materials and workshop offerings that we've discussed with you so far.
Thanks, Adrienne. So we train in two different ways. We have self-paced courses, which are all available for free on our education center and can be done asynchronously. So we have training videos that will go through every single step and part of holding a workshop. They include our teaching points, our best facilitator practices, and then we also have live trainings, which we have Q&As, our educator certification program, and workshop specific. So say you wanted to hold a workshop for a certain film and you wanted tips for it, you can attend one of our live sessions that is attached to that film and be able to interact with a One Love staff member to get all of your questions answered.
So here we have a little breakdown of our education center. So this is our online platform that we have available to anyone and everyone. And it follows our train the trainer model, which enables anyone, anywhere to be able to bring this One Love content to their young people. And so we have three buckets here, one which we had just covered by Bridget, the live and self-paced trainings, but we also have customizable lesson plans, which partner with these resources and activities. And so essentially you can pick the film that you'd like to watch. And Bridget will go into this a little bit more, but you'll be able to customize a lesson plan as far as length, the number of sessions, and so much more using the resources and activities that we have accessible on our education center. Oh, Bridget, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So just going over some of the steps on how to plan a workshop. So the first thing that you want to do is pick your audience. Where are you holding your workshop? Is it going to be in a health class, an after school program, within a team structure, or some other type of club? Then you will select the workshop, the type of whatever film that you deem the most appropriate for your group. And you can pick some of the learning objectives that we shared earlier. You then can either get trained asynchronously on the Ed Center, go to one of the live Q&A sessions or work with your local engagement manager to work on a one-on-one basis and really get trained in how you're going to hold this workshop. Then you can choose your lesson format. This is all in the Education Center. So we have multiple ways to approach this. You can use it just, you can plan for your workshop by just using a discussion guide, using our grab and go lesson plans, which include, you know, our PowerPoints, any and all accompanying resources. There's just like a complete breadth of things available to you. We try to make it as seamless as possible so that facilitators don't have to do much planning. But you also can customize if you see fit or want to kind of add something, take something away. And the next step would just be hosting your workshop.
So what does all of this mean and where does this lead us? We hope that we've empowered you the same way that we empower our young people and encourage other people to do the same, that you now have the opportunity to create an account on the Education Center. And you can schedule time with Bridget, who would be your regional engagement manager, to get help in strategizing the best ways to bring One Love to your young people right where you are. And we want to just once again say thank you so much for this opportunity and the time that we've had to connect with you, and are hopeful that we'll have some additional ways and opportunities to do that.
Yes, thank you so much. I know that we just talked a lot at you, so we would like to open up the floor for some Q&A if anybody had any questions, feedback, concerns. So at that point,
Bridget, Adrian, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. And I should note, Ellen put in the chat that all of One Love's resources are available for free, accessible via the website. So again, thank you so much. And folks, if you have questions for Bridget and Adrian, please feel free to raise your Zoom hand, or you can drop your question into the chat. I see we've got one already from Leah. Leah is asking, what is the most common concern that you see with current high school students with regard to the relationships they're in?
I would say the most common thing that I see with my young people is there's like some sense of like betrayal that comes with digital relationships and sharing screenshots or information that, you know, shouldn't be shared across the board. But I think that our phones make those unhealthy things so accessible and easy, and without the education that we provide, and it's just the Wild West out there. Adrian, what about you?
Similar for me, I would just emphasize trust overall seems to be a challenge. I think there is an underlying being able to trust themselves, but almost anticipating people betraying them. So then there's a challenge of, well, can I get to them first, and things along those lines. So I would connect that as far as a learning objective, communicating boundaries and practicing consent, what their boundaries actually are they realistic and healthy, and what's the best and healthiest way to communicate that, and what happens when someone dishonors that and crosses that boundary. But thank you for asking that question. It's a great question.
Thank you both. Other questions for our presenters? I know I was really impressed with how how the presentation was just set up and how customizable your services are, and seems to be readily and easily available on the website. I guess one thing that I was wondering, when you have all the different videos that people have to choose from, are there any that are population specific that might deal specifically with LGBTQ issues or relationship issues for people that have disabilities?
And Bridget, would you like to kick things off?
You can go ahead, Adrian. Sorry.
I was just going to say Ellen was already on it. So Ellen kind of kicked things off with some of our answers. We do have, first and foremost, I would say that you can narrow down our content as far as grade level too. So you will be able to see the length options as well as the age range. But we do have films that are catered to representing particular demographics. Either way, we have seen communities that may not necessarily depict those representations or those demographics still use some of those pieces of content for this, making sure we have those conversations and helping our young people be as whole as possible in understanding how other demographics and other communities may experience relationships compared to themselves. And then of course, we even use language on how inclusive this is, where we do encourage them to focus on the behaviors while still ensuring that we are as culturally competent and as trauma informed as possible with the different characters and the experiences that they have and share.
Thank you so much. And just to follow up on the comment that Ellen put in the chat, she's noting One Love offers 17 workshops in addition to the PSAs. These film-based programs illustrate different forms of unhealthy behaviors, different cultures, identities, and different types of relationships, for example, friendships or LGBTQ relationships. These can also be used in one-to-one sessions to start a conversation. So again, thank you for that information. We have another question, really great one. We had talked about trusted adults before. What are some ways that we can show young people as adults that we can be trusted to have these conversations?
I would say, really taking things at a comfortable pace with young people. You don't want to push, if you have a sense that something's going on with them, you don't want to press them about it too hard. You want to allow them to open up to you at a pace that feels comfortable for them. So even if that's just sitting with them and you can tell that they're, maybe not 100% that day, making sure that you're taking that at a comfortable pace. I think as well, what's worked for me with my young people in the past is just really practicing honesty and vulnerability with them. And it brings this level of humanity that is necessary for creating that type of space. Like we want them to know that we are people who have also experienced these things too. So once we normalize that kind of conversation, I think that, the floodgates are open for a lot, like a much wider range of trust between young people and adults.
Thank you. We have other questions for the presenters. You can raise your Zoom hand or put them in the chat. I'm also just wondering, I guess, as far as your representation in our New Jersey market, I believe, Bridget, you're the representative for New Jersey, right? How well represented are you in New Jersey? Like, are you guys getting out to a lot of schools in New Jersey or doing work, with Girl Scouts or other groups for teens and young people?
Absolutely. We have partnerships with many different public schools, private schools, community-based organizations in New Jersey. I think this past year alone, I've done workshops, in public schools with up to like 800 to 3,500 students. So it really depends on, what type of engagement the school wants. But there are also a lot of schools in New Jersey who are like doing this work, and they're self-sufficient in that work themselves. They've really adapted to the train the trainer model. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. I don't want to name drop any schools, but.
Sure. No, that's fine. I understand completely. I know, just listening to your program and looking at how it's structured, I work with some youth groups in the Princeton area, peer leadership programs for teens that are the programs that we work with. We teach the program to juniors and seniors, and then they replicate a version of that program for younger teens, 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. And I really think this would be an excellent program to bring in, to have you guys like come to our midwinter retreat or something, when we usually do customized sessions and trainings. And I can just think about so many different ways, you know, that we could employ your materials. And I guess, you know, Ellen is curious, and I'm curious as well for the folks on the call. You know, how do you think you might be able to use One Love's materials in your practices? You know, are you a private practitioner who may want to get some training on your own with the trainers so that you can run some group sessions or something? Or is it something that you'd be looking into a school, bringing into a school classroom with you, or into an enrichment program? Would love to hear what kind of representation we have on the call, and where you all are practicing. If you want to just drop that in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand. Leah's saying definitely could bring to her scouts. Yes, Leah. Otherwise I am macro. Oh, well, that's a good question. So how do you think a macro social worker, somebody who doesn't really engage in direct practice, might be able to use this information?
When you say macro, can you define that further?
Sure. So people that are more involved with advocacy related to public policy and practices, folks that are maybe in administration and management at organizations, rather than those doing direct hands-on clinical work.
Well, I would say that, first of all, one of the great things about New Jersey is, and it's really a very advanced state in terms of the state mandates for teaching relationship health in the schools. It's way ahead of New York State, for example, and health in general is mandatory for 6th grade through 12th grade every single year, versus New York State, where it's only one time in middle school and one time in high school. So in New Jersey, there's just an incredible opportunity for bringing this kind of information to students every year from 6th through 12th grade. And so that that law was strengthened last year. The relationship health curriculum was strengthened to include practice in the classroom. So this idea that we've brought out in this session of being able to practice the conversation was put into the mandate. So really, truly, New Jersey is very progressive in this way, because that's a, you know, obviously a well-known behavior way to affect and impact behavior. So to answer the question, first of all, support that mandate. Of course, when there is a mandate, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's funding behind it. So that's one way to support it. It also doesn't mean that every school is monitored by the state. And so those are, you know, to support funding behind teaching relationship health and support some kind of monitoring of whether these, you know, lessons are getting out there is, I think, one of the, on a systemic level, one of the best ways to support this work.
Thank you. Do you all do any advocacy and outreach at all to state leaders and elected officials? Like I know you've said, so New Jersey happens to be very, very far ahead. Do you all speak regularly with folks in the New York legislature or other states you represent to try and get this type of teaching requirement instituted in schools?
We are embarking on that in New York State. There are 2 bills before the legislature that we're working on, and working with, you know, partners in the state to begin to advocate and lobby around those bills.
Thank you. Yeah, so if anybody is on this call from out of state, because occasionally we do get folks from across the country on these calls, if anybody from outside of New York, New Jersey area is looking to bring this type of training into your districts and into your state's curriculum, please consider reaching out to One Love, and maybe y'all can work together to achieve that. A couple of people did drop comments, just noting what type of where they're practicing their social work. Lisa says she's a school-based therapist at a high school and middle school in South Jersey, and Tafea is a mental health school social worker for high school, and she, I guess, can envision using this to run groups and in classroom presentations. So, anything else that it seems the questions are kind of quiet. Is there anything else, Ellen or Adrian or Bridget, that you want to share before we conclude for the day?
I just want to say, well, first of all, thank you, but I do want to just say one other thing about what we've noticed in this last year, a really amazing trend, which is, first of all, post-pandemic, the demand for relationship health materials or the understanding of the importance of relationship health in mental health has just grown tremendously. And the demand for these materials has really increased. And so there has definitely been a shift. Another trend that we've seen, and I've been at One Love for 5 years, is that more and more clinical practitioners are in different nonprofits are approaching us for work with young people individually or with families. And of course, as you saw, we're really well adapted to a classroom setting. But this demand for using our materials in a clinical setting one-on-one has caused us to expand our thinking. And what we hear quite a bit is what these clinicians are worried about is, especially in the space of emotional abuse, if a child is in an abusive situation, would they know how to report that? And, because in an emotionally abusive situation, the whole point of that is to make you feel that you're the person who's wrong. And so what these organizations are trying to get is materials and tools to use in these individual sessions that will help, talk about the difference between unhealthy and healthy, and then help these patients of theirs or clients of theirs begin to identify, how to describe, what words to use to describe behaviors that are happening to them. And so this is this is really a new effort on our part, and we would just love to work with any members in your association to develop this out and hear from you as if you go forward and use our materials. And of course, there would be many more conversations after this. If you're interested, this is, just a first step, and we would work with anyone who's interested to go further. So, and really provide our materials and our training in a much deeper way. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. A couple more comments in the chat. Shantaya notes, based in New Jersey, but worked for a mental health app for teens across the country, coaching and mental health support. Lee says, I'm a counselor, trainer, and work with middle and high school social workers and school counselors. I plan to introduce the curriculum to my staff and hope to implement it next school year. Wonderful. That's great, Lee. And Bridget also shared her email address in the chat, which I will also send to everybody that registered for this program afterwards, along with a copy of the slides and a link to the recording. But Bridget's email in the chat, it's bridget.boylan at, sorry, I can't see, I've got a thing over the screen. Is it joinonelove.org? Sorry, I had weird little Zoom pop-ups covering that menu. Bridget.boylan at joinonelove.org. So if there's no other questions, we can wrap a little bit early and give you all 8 or 9 minutes back in your day. I know we all crave as much of that time back as we can. So last call for question or comments. All right. Well, again, thank you all so much for being here today. This was a really great presentation, and it sounds like a really wonderful product that you have available to help social workers accomplish their goals when working with teens and working in issues of relationships and dating violence, IPV. So thank you so much for being here. We will probably within the next 24 to 48 hours, I'd say, you can expect an email with a link to the recording, the slides, and the contact information for Bridget and Adrian, so you can follow up with them as you'd like. And thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you at a community conversation. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
good one.